I want you to picture the end of a really, really long day.
Oh, we all know that feeling.
Right. You know the exact kind I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You've been navigating gridlock traffic, dealing with, like, difficult, unpredictable personalities at work.
Maybe managing a highly stressful situation with your family.
Exactly. You finally get home, you walk through your front door, you turn the deadbolt, and you just exhale.
Oh.
You can physically feel it.
Oh, absolutely.
Your shoulders drop a full 2 inches, your heart rate slows down, the cortisol clears out of your system. You can finally take your heavy armor off because in that specific moment, behind that locked door, you know you are safe.
Right. The threat level drops to 0.
Yeah. Now, I want you to imagine what it would actually feel like if you could never, ever let that guard down.
Wow.
Imagine if your nervous system was permanently locked in that state of high alert and that feeling of relief, that turning of the emotional deadbolt just didn't exist in your biological vocabulary.
It's physically painful to even conceptualize, honestly. I mean, the human body just isn't designed to sustain that level of chronic sympathetic arousal.
No, not at all.
The sheer caloric energy required to keep your threat detection systems running at maximum capacity 24/7 is staggering.
It's completely overwhelming. And that state of perpetual exhaustion, that neurological inability to ever truly feel safe with the people around you, well, that is the mission for our deep dive today.
It's a heavy topic, but a crucial one.
It really is. We're exploring the hidden psychological mechanics of paranoid personality disorder, or PPD. And more importantly, we are looking at the roadmap out of it.
Yes.
To ground this exploration, we're using a really highly detailed clinical blueprint from coping and healing counseling. They're a dedicated telehealth therapy practice based in Georgia, and they've laid out not just the stark reality of how this condition, rewires a person's worldview, but the actual mechanical steps of how to dismantle it.
Which is the hopeful part of all this.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the heavy emotional toll, what exactly are we looking at when we talk about PPD from a purely clinical baseline? Because, I think a lot of people misuse the word paranoid in casual conversation.
Oh, they absolutely do. People use it all the time to describe, temporary anxiety.
Right, like thinking you left the stove on or something.
Exactly. Or, worrying a boss is mad at you because they sent a short email. But clinical PPD is fundamentally different. It is a long-standing, deeply entrenched, pervasive pattern of distrust.
So it's not a temporary mood.
Not at all. We are talking about an individual whose default operating system inherently assumes that others are actively out to deceive them, exploit them, or cause them harm.
Wow.
And what's fascinating here is that this assumption operates completely independent of any actual observable evidence.
That is wild. So they aren't, connecting dots. They're essentially drawing the dots themselves.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. In psychology, we look at something called hostile attribution bias. For most of us, if an ambiguous situation happens, say, a coworker forgets to sense you on an email, your brain might process several neutral possibilities.
Like maybe they were rushing or it was just a glitch.
Right, exactly. But for a person with PPD, the brain just bypasses all those neutral options. It immediately attributes malicious intent.
So the coworker is actively plotting to cut them out of the project.
Yes. The baseline assumption of the world is that it is a predatory, dangerous place.
Which takes us right into the internal experience of this, where the clinical definition sort of collides with everyday life.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to read about hostile attribution bias on a piece of paper, but the lived reality of PPD is where it gets incredibly heavy.
It's exhausting.
The internal mechanisms at play here aren't just a vague, generalized sense of unease. We're talking about doubting the core loyalty of the people closest to you.
The people who love you most.
Right. Your spouse, your best friend, your siblings. It's this tragic tendency to hear hidden, malicious insults inside completely innocent, mundane comments.
Let's break down the mechanics of how that actually happens, because it's a profound cognitive distortion. A compliment is, well, it's rarely just a compliment.
Give me an example.
So if you say to someone with PPD, you did a really great job on that presentation, their internal filter immediately starts looking for the trap.
Oh, man.
They might process that as they're expressing surprise that I did a great job. That means they usually think I'm totally incompetent.
Wow.
They are laying the groundwork to undermine my authority with the team. So the innocent comment is instantly weaponized by their own neurological filter.
And because of that constant perceived attack, they carry these lifelong heavy grudges. Time never softens the blow because, in their mind, the threat level just never dropped.
Never.
It makes me think of it this way. It's like having a high-tech, multi-million-dollar emotional security system, but the firmware is totally corrupted.
I like that.
The sensors are dialed up so high that a leaf falling on the driveway registers as a 5-alarm home invasion. And because the alarm is always blaring, eventually that deafening siren just becomes your baseline reality. You forget what silence even sounds like.
The corrupted firmware analogy is spot on, really, because it highlights the malfunction in processing, not just the sensitivity. But here is perhaps the most critical and challenging insight from a clinical perspective.
Okay, what's that?
To the person experiencing PPD, this does not feel like a disorder.
Wait, really?
In clinical terms, we call this egosyntonic. Their behavior and their thoughts align perfectly with their own fundamental beliefs.
So they don't think anything is wrong with them.
Exactly. It doesn't feel like an overactive alarm system to them. It feels like realism.
I struggle with that a little bit, though.
Oh, so?
Well, if you are constantly exhausted and constantly fighting with everyone around you, wouldn't you eventually look around and think, wait, I'm the only one reacting this way? Maybe the problem is my alarm system.
See, you're applying a non-PPD logical framework to a PPD mind.
Oh, I see.
They don't look around and think they're the problem. They genuinely believe that they are the only ones seeing the world clearly and that everyone else is simply naive, walking around dangerously blind to the threats that are so obvious to them.
That sounds so lonely.
It is. If you genuinely believe you are the only awake person in a room full of sleepwalkers, you bear the entire crushing burden of protecting yourself. It is a life lived constantly braced for a betrayal that you are absolutely certain is coming.
And you can't just turn off what your brain perceives as objective reality. Like if I see a grizzly bear standing in my kitchen, I don't try to rationally convince myself the bear is a hallucination.
Right. Your adrenaline spikes and you run.
Exactly. And to them, the bear is always standing right there. Which brings us to the external impact of this condition. Because you don't just live inside your own head.
No, you don't.
This intense realism eventually crashes into the outside world. And specifically, it crashes into the people you love most.
It creates a deeply tragic cycle. Think about the daily reality for the loved ones, the spouse, the child, the lifelong friend. They are being relentlessly accused of things they haven't done.
It must be devastating.
It is. They're constantly having their basic loyalty interrogated. They have to walk on eggshells every single day, knowing that any offhand comment, a slight change in tone, or even like a particular facial expression could be interpreted as an insult or a covert threat.
It's severe emotional whiplash. I mean, you're desperately trying to love and support someone who is actively pushing you away to protect themselves from you.
And human beings only have so much emotional stamina. The constant need to prove your own innocence, the absolute inability to just relax and have a normal, trusting connection, it drains the loved ones completely.
So what happens?
Eventually, unable to sustain the massive emotional output required to manage the paranoia, these loved ones slowly drift away. They have to leave the relationship just to preserve their own mental health.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and honestly, where I get stuck on the mechanics of how this ever gets resolved.
Okay.
If the person with PPD is terrified of betrayal and abandonment, and their hypervigilant behavior pushes their loved ones away,
Right.
when those people finally leave, doesn't that just validate everything the person believed in the first place? If the loved one's leaving actually confirms the core fear that no one can be trusted and everyone will eventually abandon you, how is it even logically possible to break the loop?
It's tough.
It seems like a perfectly sealed, inescapable trap.
You are identifying the most profound tragedy of this condition. It is indeed a perfectly sealed behavioral loop. The defense mechanism itself manufactures the exact isolation the person was so terrified of experiencing. They spent their entire life building this massive fortress to keep the enemies out, but they end up starving to death inside it.
That is a brutal image.
It is. Because when people finally leave, the person with PPD does not experience a moment of self-reflection. They don't think, oh, my accusations pushed my wife away. They think, I was right. She was never loyal. I am entirely alone, and the world is exactly as dangerous as I thought it was.
Wow. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy functioning at the highest possible neurological level.
Yes.
The brain is gathering evidence to support a false hypothesis, but the evidence is real because the brain caused it.
And that is the exact reason why professional clinical intervention is an absolute necessity. A person cannot break this loop from the inside because their own mind is the architect of the trap.
They need an outside perspective.
Exactly. Furthermore, their loved ones, no matter how well-meaning or patient, simply do not have the clinical tools to dismantle a defense mechanism that is that deeply entrenched.
Which transitions us to the actual antidote. Because the blueprint we have today from CHC doesn't just leave us stuck inside the fortress.
Thankfully.
It maps out the architecture of trust. It explains how a professional steps into this void and starts to carefully dismantle the walls. Now, first of all, it's explicitly clear that a formal diagnosis of PPD has to be made by a licensed clinician.
This isn't something you can just armchair diagnose.
Right. Just because your uncle is acting a little suspicious at Thanksgiving doesn't mean he has PPD.
Exactly. The clinical diagnosis is the vital first step because it dictates the entire strategy of treatment. The approach to treating someone who inherently trusts no one is incredibly complex.
I can imagine.
It's completely counterintuitive to how we normally try to comfort people. The therapist does not demand trust, and they don't try to logically argue the patient out of their paranoia.
Right. They don't walk into the room, gesture to the couch, and say, hey, you're in a safe space now. I'm a professional. You can trust me.
Doing that would immediately trigger the alarm system. Oh, yeah. To someone with PPD, demanding trust is perceived as a threat. It's a violation of their boundaries, an attempt to manipulate them. Instead, the therapist has to earn it through agonizingly patient behavioral modeling.
Agonizingly patient. That's a good phrase for it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how the brain learns, trust isn't a switch you can just flip. It's a completely new neural pathway that has to be constructed.
Right.
The therapy room essentially becomes a controlled, sterile laboratory. The therapist allows the patient to test their hypotheses about the world in real time.
What does that actually look like in practice, though? If the patient throws an accusation at the therapist, how does the therapist respond without validating the delusion?
By maintaining a stance of non-defensive curiosity.
Okay.
If the patient says, "You're just taking notes so you can use them against me later," a normal person would get defensive and say, "No, I'm not. I'm trying to help you."
Right, which would sound like a lie to them.
Exactly. But the therapist absorbs the accusation without reacting emotionally. They might say, "It sounds like you're feeling very vulnerable right now. Let's talk about what it would mean if I were doing that."
Oh, that's brilliant.
They model a completely non-threatening response. They consistently prove, session after session, that they are not going to attack, exploit, or deceive the patient.
I love that concept of the laboratory. It takes the pressure off the outside world. And there's this beautiful, almost poetic simplicity in how this healing actually manifests. It starts incredibly small.
Very small.
It starts with just one single safe relationship. If the therapist can prove consistency over a long period, it creates a hairline fracture in that armor of realism.
Yes.
And from that one safe relationship, a cascading effect begins. The brain starts to realize, okay, if this one person isn't a threat, maybe my baseline is wrong. Maybe other safe relationships are possible.
It's the mechanism of recalibrating the baseline. Once the nervous system physically experiences evidence that safety exists, it can start to tentatively look for safety elsewhere. It lowers the volume on the alarm system.
So what does this all mean for someone actually trying to navigate this landscape? We've talked about the theory, the mechanics of the trap, and the slow, delicate laboratory work of healing. But how does someone practically access this kind of incredibly patient, highly specialized care? This is where the specific framework provided by Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC, serves as a really vital case study of what modern accessible care actually looks like.
Examining their model is highly relevant, particularly when you consider the unique psychological barriers a person with PPD faces. The logistics of getting help are often just as triggering as the disorder itself.
Exactly. Just think about the process of driving to a clinic, sitting in a crowded waiting room with strangers, filling out forms. That alone might be an overwhelming trigger for someone dealing with severe paranoia.
Oh, it would be a nightmare.
So looking at CHC's framework, the first major structural detail is that they are a 100% telehealth practice. They are entirely IPA compliant, and they operate across all 159 counties in the state of Georgia.
We cannot overstate how crucial that telehealth aspect is for this specific demographic.
Why is that?
It grants the patient absolute sovereignty over their physical environment. They can engage in this highly vulnerable terrifying process from the one place they might actually feel a degree of safety, their own living room.
That makes total sense.
They control the camera, they control the space, they control the exits. It removes a massive layer of environmental variables while they slowly begin to lower their emotional defensiveness.
And it's not just a solo practitioner. CHC utilizes a diverse team of over 15 licensed therapists. We're talking licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, and licensed marriage and family therapists.
Right.
The blueprint emphasizes that this is a culturally competent team, which is vital.
Cultural competency is the bedrock of building trust. A clinician must deeply understand the nuances of the patient's background, their community norms, and their lived experiences.
Because otherwise they might misinterpret something.
Exactly. Shared cultural understanding drastically reduces the chance of misinterpreting communication styles, which, as we discussed with the hostile attribution bias, prevents those false positives from setting off the alarm system.
That's a great point.
And while we are focusing intensely on PPD today, a practice like CHC doesn't operate in a vacuum. They don't just treat one isolated disorder.
Right. They handle the whole spectrum. They do individual, couples, and family therapy. They also work with teens, ages 13 and up, and offer life coaching.
Their specialties are highly relevant to our discussion, too. Things like anxiety, depression, trauma and PTSD, grief, relationship issues, and chronic stress.
It's a huge umbrella.
It matters because a personality disorder rarely exists in isolation. Someone presenting with severe PPD symptoms might be driven by deeply unresolved underlying trauma or suffering from crippling anxiety that constantly fuels their defense mechanisms.
So you have to treat the whole person.
Right. A comprehensive multidisciplinary practice can address the entire psychological ecosystem rather than just playing whack-a-mole with isolated symptoms.
But of course, knowing the help is out there and knowing the mechanics of how it works is really only half the battle.
Sadly, yes.
The other half, the one that stops so many people dead in their tracks, is the harsh logistical reality of paying for it. I mean, if you inherently distrust the world, you probably also believe the healthcare system is just trying to scam you out of your money.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most critical one for true accessibility. How do we prevent the cost of specialized care from becoming just another brick in the wall?
It's a huge barrier.
The CHC blueprint provides very specific, encouraging data on this. For patients utilizing Medicaid, there is a $0 copay.
$0.
Zero?
That doesn't just help financially. It actively disarms the paranoia that the clinic is just trying to exploit them for profit.
Precisely the point. It neutralizes a major cognitive distortion right out of the gate. And for those utilizing private insurance, they have structured themselves to accept major providers.
Like who?
Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana. And the copays for those patients range from $0 to $40 a session.
That fundamentally changes the landscape for someone who's standing on the edge, hesitating.
It really does.
When you remove the geographical and environmental barriers through telehealth, and you drastically lower the financial barrier through these broad insurance frameworks, you clear the path. The only thing left is making the agonizing choice to actually reach out.
Which is hard enough on its own.
Yeah. For a nervous system completely braced for betrayal, reaching out is an act of immense, almost unimaginable bravery.
It is arguably the hardest single step they will ever take. Picking up the phone or typing out that email goes against every single protective, evolutionary instinct they have spent their life cultivating. It is a leap into the dark.
And for those ready to take that incredibly brave leap, or for the exhausted loved ones trying to help them find the path forward, the contact information for coping and healing counseling is straightforward.
Good.
You can visit them directly online at chctherapy.com. You can reach out via email at support@chctherapy.com, or you can call them at 404-832-0102.
Let's repeat that for them.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat that just so you have it. The website is chctherapy.com, and the phone number is 40832-0002.
Having those direct, clear lines of communication is crucial. It demystifies the terrifying process of initiating care.
It really does. And as we pull all of these threads together, I want to take a second to look back at the complex journey we've just mapped out in this deep dive.
It's been quite a journey.
We started in a place of profound physiological and emotional exhaustion. We explored the hypervigilant, heavily armored internal world of paranoid personality disorder, where every innocent comment is processed as a threat.
Right.
And the concept of realism is tragically just another word for total isolation. We saw the mechanics of how that internal alarm system pushes away the exact people the person loves most, sealing them inside that agonizing, self-fulfilling prophecy of abandonment.
But we refuse to leave them in the trap.
We did. We transitioned out of the fortress and into the architecture of hope. We explored how a licensed professional, utilizing a controlled, barrier-free framework like the one at CHC, can patiently step into that void.
And patiently being the key word.
We saw how the slow, methodical process of earning trust, rather than demanding it, can create a cascading effect that eventually opens the door to a life where genuine, safe relationships are actually possible.
It is a profound journey from total isolation to meaningful connection, facilitated by patient, highly accessible care.
And I want to speak directly to you right now listening to this. Whether you are dealing with these overwhelming feelings of hypervigilance yourself, or you deeply love someone who is caught in that tragic behavioral loop, or maybe you're just navigating an increasingly chaotic world and feeling your own internal guard creeping higher and higher every day.
We've all been there to some degree.
Right. The core fundamental takeaway from our sources today is that trust can be relearned. The neurological pathways can be rebuilt. The heavy armor does not have to be a permanent fixture of your life.
It doesn't.
One single, genuinely safe relationship can change the entire trajectory of a human life. It starts small, but it can start today.
And as we close out this exploration, I want to leave you with a lingering thought to mull over on your own.
Okay?
We've talked extensively about the heavy, corrupted armor of PPD, built on the absolute certainty that the world is deceptive. But imagine for a moment what actually happens inside that therapy room after months of patient work. What does it physically and emotionally feel like for that person in the exact split-second moment they realize their therapist genuinely cares about them? Is that first tiny crack of undeniable trust, a feeling of immense life-saving relief, or is it absolutely terrifying because it means finally surrendering the only armor they've ever known?
Wow. That is a staggering question to sit with.
Yes.
And maybe the truest answer is that it's a messy, beautiful combination of both.
I think so.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Remember that feeling of walking through your front door and letting your shoulders drop? That feeling of deep, foundational safety is something everyone deserves to experience. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will catch you on the next one.